to All the Grief, a weekly podcast for all those who have been touched by grief. We are your hosts. I am Rebecca Luttrell.
And I'm Andrea Mathern.
We are two friends, a therapist and a social scientist, both highly sensitive fellow grievers, here to share our hearts as we talk about all the grief. Hi, Andrea.
Hi, Rebecca. How are you?
Pretty good. Yeah. How has this week been for you?
I think we've talked about this before and we laugh because we don't know when these will actually come out, but we are in the last stretch of summer and it has been for our family like total wild. Summer has its own cadence, doesn't fucking care at all what your plans are. So I've been just like absorbing that as somebody who is more probably routined and planned than I am like freewheeling and go with the flow. But it's been fun. It's been fun. I spent a week with the boys in the cabin and so it was nice to be up in the mountains away from like this super intense heat. How about you?
It sounds nice to get into the mountains. It has been hot. This might air in December and it will be unrelatable, but it has been hot and it's been good. I've had an influx of visitors and that has its own rhythm, and then took on a DIY project to rip out the carpet in our basement and ambitiously put in flooring, even though that's not my strong suit.
Ooh.
Yeah, but it came out great. And
ooh, send me a picture. I hate the carpet in our basement too.
Okay, I will. But yeah, so it's been busy and not a lot of downtime. And I realized that I crave a lot of downtime. And it's still going to be busy because it's a ramp up of the school year and there's all kinds of things that come with that. So we are making our way through the next couple of weeks and then hopefully settling into a rhythm with the fall.
Beautiful. Yes, I look forward to a rhythm. I try to embrace sort of I guess I could think of it as like the jazz rhythm or jam band rhythm of the summer, which are not my genres. But I very much look forward to my fall concerto or just like regular old rock ballad.
Love it.
All right. Well, today we are taking on something that is both personal to both of us, as well as I think probably more common than we talk about sort of in everyday conversation, and that is miscarriage. So I thought we would just kind of open it up and share why we selected this topic and just have a conversation about how it's impacted us and friends and family members.
Yeah. Do you want to start with your story?
Sure. Yeah. So I never wanted to be a mom. I was not the girl that imagined herself being a parent. I really was not. And then I fell in love. I sort of fell madly in love, and I suddenly was able to kind of reclaim love and my body and my own choice to like produce a human. And I really fell in love with the idea of creating a being out of this really pure, genuine love that I felt for my husband. And so we were older when we met and we both wanted children at that point. And so we kind of got started right away. And we were already planning a wedding, and we're kind of timing it because one, I'm vain and didn't want to be pregnant in a wedding dress. And also our families are both very Catholic. And so we were trying to avoid any additional major conflicts. Like we weren't getting married in a Catholic church. There were already things that people were going to be raising eyebrows about. We're more on the hippie side already. So, as we were getting prepared for our wedding, I got pregnant a couple of times. And the first time we were on vacation visiting my husband's cousin, and I had only just realized that I was pregnant like the week before, maybe. So this was my first miscarriage, was also a very early miscarriage. And I just remember the sadness when I realized what was happening in really early miscarriages. Mine, at least, was very sort of like what you hear sometimes. Heavy period is kind of how it felt. But I knew exactly what it was because it was so the timing. So that was my first one. And then unfortunately, we continued to have this experience. And then as we approached our wedding day, we were pregnant and got pretty far. We had like talked with a midwife and we're planning our home birth and all the things, everything that you could imagine and envision. We announced our pregnancy at our rehearsal dinner to all of our closest friends and family. And then we went on our honeymoon and I just did not feel well. And you can kind of write it off to early pregnancy, right? Like I didn't want to eat anything. Everything kind of made me feel kind of shitty. And when I came back from our honeymoon, I went to my midwife, but she did an ultrasound and I was all by myself. My husband was working and she didn't find a heartbeat. And, it was so crushing. It was so I felt like I had failed. I felt like there was something wrong. I felt like there was no hope because this, had gotten the furthest. It was the pregnancy that had gotten the furthest. And we were, in
How
that.
far along?
Well, we were in that countdown. We were probably 13 weeks where you think you're kind of in the clear.
Yeah.
Of course, she doesn't know if the heartbeat stopped while we were on our honeymoon for 2 weeks. And then you have this choice, do you want a drug induced? Do you want the fetus to pass naturally? And I decided to let it pass naturally, which I still think was the right choice for me. But it did create this like every day, just kind of waiting for it to happen. And it took a while. And I remember going to a friend of mine who does Mayan abdominal work. And I remember her telling me, Andrea, you have to let it go. You have to let the baby go. No wishing, no hoping is going to suddenly bring this baby back to life. And it's not able to pass because you're not able to let go of it. And I just remember being on her table, just crying, realizing that was part of it, that I was just so desperate for this not to be my reality that I really couldn't let it go in my heart or in my mind. And then on Halloween, we were downstairs watching a movie, and all of a sudden I just like doubled over in pain, crying. I was in so much pain. My husband called a friend of ours who is an OBGYN, and the midwife had told me it would feel like a heavy period, like you might cramp and it might be, uncomfortable cramping. And I had never felt anything like this before. And so when he called our friend who was the OBGYN, she said, I'm sorry that they told her that. Sometimes, especially at this stage, it can
labor,
like your cervix has to dilate. Yes, you go into labor and, this will be small in comparison, obviously, to like a baby who's full term, but her body is going into labor. And so that really changed how my husband and I were handling it. And it was just too many graphic things to talk about, but I can remember them so vividly, and crying and just being so heartbroken because that was the end. I had finally let go of this little human and all of my dreams and aspirations, and it was officially over. So that was the one that was very traumatic, and I think really shifted how I thought about getting pregnant. I was like a little bit angry. We ended up having to pursue fertility treatments. But I was angry, I was angry that my whole life I had, drilled into my head, if you do anything sexual, you will immediately become pregnant. And then here I had finally decided I wanted to have a baby and I couldn't. And I think a combination of being a trauma survivor, being raised Catholic, there was a lot of guilt. Like, did I do something to deserve this? Did me not wanting kids my whole life like somehow change the cosmic energy that now the universe is like, well, you didn't want one, so now you can't get one. Just fucked up shit that your brain does that makes no sense on this side. I have to share that I'm, about to have 6-year-olds in November. So I'm on the other side of it, and I can look back now and know that that was not realistic what I was thinking and really didn't make sense. But in the moment and in my sadness, I thought somehow it was my fault.
Yeah. There's some pieces to our stories that are similar that's interesting that we've never talked about. But I think most of my life, I always got a lot of feedback about what a great mom I would be. And there was a part of me that I was the oldest, not just in my sibling configuration, but also I come from a large extended family, and I was the oldest niece and grandchild and whatever. So I had a very adult way of being in the world. And then I would care for all these like younger kids as they were born. I was always the babysitter, and people say, "You're so patient. You'd be such a good mom." So there was a expectation that that was just true, that that was going to happen. And then I met my first husband, and he didn't want kids. And I had this moment of like, do I choose you and not children, or do I choose to have children and not you? And so I was really clear at that point. I said, "Oh, well, I do want kids, so I guess this isn't going to work." And then he said, "Well, I'm not saying no forever." So he kind of waffled, but it wasn't a strong yes, but it was enough for me to say, "Well, let's pursue this." And then kind of consistently throughout the year, like we dated for 2 years, we got married. And then through the years, he just had a lot of resistance. And so it was sort of it's not the right time. It's not the right time. And people were asking, "Are you going to have kids?" or whatever. And I kind of got to this spiritual place within myself that realized I could have a kid, but I actually get so many opportunities to be in that mothering energy. And that's what people are responding to. So I had a lot of peace where I thought, I may not have children. And yes, I know I'm such a mother. And that's just a gift to everyone who I love, unless it's oppressive. But mostly, just,
Right.
yeah, feeling like this is just part of who I am, and I'm nurturing and I'm caring, and I could give that to one child, and I'm constantly giving that to all the children in my life. And so my nieces feel so loved, and my nephew. And I was sort of in that place. But we still were like, maybe, but we'll know if that's going to be a part of our journey. And then my sister had her first pregnancy, and she's 6 years younger than me. She lived near me, we had moved around a lot, but now we were in the same city. So it was like, oh, this is going to be so amazing, and had sort of been on this journey with her through the whole pregnancy. And they had to induce because she had preeclampsia, but she was far enough along that the baby would be viable. It just was a little bit earlier than they weren't willing to wait. And so they induced, and it caused an abruption, and the baby died before he was born. But they actually didn't know until he was born. And I'll go into that story
Mm.
when we talk about, I think we'll do sort of a separate episode really talking about stillbirth and
Yeah.
early loss of babies, because there are differences. But
Yeah.
it impacted me because we went to see her, and the baby was in the room. They, his body, so that she could
Yeah.
have her last moments with him. And she wanted us to have these moments with him. And in that moment, I thought, there's no way I want to have children. This is too painful.
Oh,
And it's too much. And I had of course, her grief was immense. And I had tremendous grief as her older sister, that I couldn't protect her from that I
oh,
couldn't, take the
yeah.
pain from her. And so I did a lot with her and around the grief. And so that story I will unfold completely in another
Yeah.
episode. But that was one of the more intense griefs in my life. So then I felt really like it's too risky and I'm not interested. And then I want to say like a year or two passed, and, we had sort of gone through a lot of major healing, and just we had been on this really intense healing journey. And I kind of got back in this place of, I'm not trying to have a baby, and I'm not trying to have a baby, but it was like this non-committal space. But
Sure.
I thought, I'm getting older, and if a baby wants to be here, then I'm not saying no. So whatever that kind of non-committal energy that let me say maybe, I got pregnant. Everyone was really excited. I mean, I told friends, they were like crying because they really thought I was never going to have a baby. And I guess they were super invested
Wow.
in that. And
Yeah.
it was just a lot of emotion and energy. But I found out really early. I mean, I knew within weeks. I was like, I think I'm pregnant, and took a test, and and went to the hospital. And I mean, we were like just at a month. And so heard the heartbeat, saw the heartbeat, but you still have that window that's sort of that 11 to 12 weeks. So we went to a Christmas party and I wore high heels that were like so uncomfortable. And I don't know what made me think that's what I wanted to wear, but I did. And I like feel like I like stumbled through the night. And the next morning I started to cramp a lot and then knew that it was happening. And so had the whole experience of losing this pregnancy and knowing that's it. It was the heavy period. It was tissue. It was just all the stuff. And I was like, maybe that just happens sometimes. And so let's go to the doctor and find out. And then there was no heartbeat. And I mentioned the heels because that was that thing like you're talking about where you question like, was that the decision I made that was the wrong decision? Did I cause this? And,
Yes.
part of me is like, maybe it just wasn't a viable pregnancy, but there was can we go back in time and can make a different
Yeah.
decision and we see if it comes out the same? And what I realized, because then my sister really responded to it like it was the same. And she was wanting to hold me in this same immense grief that she had been in. And I almost felt guilty that I wasn't having that level of grief, where I was like, there's a grief, but it's not the same level because it was so early and you still knew this could happen. But I also was having grief. And so it was this weird thing where I was like, I don't want to say, no, I don't need that much care, but I did need an amount of care. So it was really confusing.
Yeah.
But what I realized in the experience was what happens. And I think a grief that happens on so many levels in our lives is where something's happening in the present, like, okay, I'm pregnant. And then we're future forecasting. This is going to be the bedroom we're going to remake into a nursery. What's it going to look like? What names are we entertaining? What is it going to be like to be parents? There's all this stuff that gets put into the experience of being pregnant, and then you're not. And now there's loss that you didn't even have that you lost, which I think is common. It's like what doesn't get to happen is one of those things in grief, for any grief,
Absolutely.
any loss. And I think just hormonally, it's a big shift for your body to go through it. Like prepared to be pregnant, now it's not, and your hormones are really intense. So I was just having like the intensity of certain grief that was surprising me. And then a feeling of like not wanting to have a hierarchy of grief with my sister, but feeling like, yeah, your grief is definitely bigger and I want to honor that. And
Right.
I'm having grief, but I don't want you to think that it's that grief, and so really just sort of struggling with it. And so having that, then saying, okay, I'm done, fast forward that I decide to go to grad school. And then there's all these things that are sort of happening. My husband and I get divorced. And then I met someone, in the middle of my grad program. And I, again, decided, okay, well, I'm getting old. So, like, sure, let's give it a shot. And we did get pregnant. And I, have my daughter now. So there's also something to be said for, like, I know there are a lot of women who have multiple miscarriages. And then, you and I both have children on the other side. And I know when my sister lost her baby and for a long time couldn't get pregnant, there was a lot of resentment about people with babies. And yeah. And so just honoring like that this isn't always the story too, right? That you get to have children that you really want at some point. It doesn't always turn out that way. So in my curiosity for you, and I know there's a little bit more to your story too, because then you went to fertility
Right.
treatment. And then my curiosity is like, what was the experience of grief like in all of this for you? Because it sort of is a longer story of multiple losses.
Yeah. So, one of the things I remember reading at some point after the major miscarriage was a quote by Mark Zuckerberg, who I would never quote in any other context, I doubt. But he and his wife experienced a handful of miscarriages. I don't remember how many, but he says, you feel hopeful when you learn you're going to have a child. You start imagining who they'll become and dreaming of hopes for their future. You start making plans and then they're gone. It's a lonely experience. And that is what I felt when we wanted. I'm sure it is absolutely, there are so many other scenarios. And I, in my own life and people that I know, have experienced pregnancy that is not wanted. And
Mhm.
so I understand that pregnancy isn't necessarily always an exciting thing to see. But when you are trying and hopeful, and then you get that positive pregnancy test, your mind goes to work. You just start to imagine holding that baby. You imagine so many things. Yes, like you said, the nursery name, it's hard. And I think there's this strange thing that I then noticed in pregnancy communities, which is like, don't tell anyone until you're at 13 weeks because you could lose the baby,
Mhm.
which I think feels so shitty because then I'm like,
Mhm.
you're all by yourself. If you wanted that baby and you lost it, if you were 2 weeks in or 12 weeks in, it is tough. And if you're supposed to not tell anyone so that then you don't have to tell anyone that you had a miscarriage,
Mm.
it just feels so shitty. And I remember a friend, after we had had our miscarriage, she told us she was pregnant and then she lost the baby. And I remember her words. She said, "It's my fault. It was a rookie mistake that I told anybody before 13 weeks."
Mm.
And I just thought, but if you hadn't told us, how could we all be here for you right now?
Right.
Like, I'm so grateful that you told us, and you were so happy when you told us. It's that idea of like stealing your own joy.
Mhm.
Like, if I don't get excited about this job I'm going to get, then if I don't get it, I won't be sad. And I'm like, no, y'all, you're going to be sad either way.
Yes.
You might as well have the silver lining. You
Mhm.
might as well be excited when you feel excited rather than pretend that you're not feeling hopeful and excited and overwhelmed with love because you might not get what you're hoping for in the end. So that quote for me just really helped me feel okay in that I had hoped from the moment of finding out I was pregnant. I had hoped to hold that baby. I had hoped all these different things, and all of that was gone.
Mhm.
And like you said, there are different levels of grief. I became part of this infertility community, many of which had had everything from a lot of very early miscarriages to stillborn babies. And there was so much room and space for all of that, or just grieving that they never were going to be a mom. Many people go on the infertility journey and never become parents.
Mhm.
And so there's so many different ways that people are grieving. And I felt like that was my first online community. And I felt like there was so much space for people to have all of these different kinds of grief. And there was someone who could relate and have so much deep empathy for where you were in whatever part of your journey, because infertility is a fucking ride. When I hear people say, I've literally had people say this, "Oh, I hope we have to do infertility treatment so that I get twins." I
Oh.
don't want to talk to you anymore.
Yeah.
So I think it's so many things that you said are so touching. And I'm like you, I love hearing the complexity of your stories because there are so many moments where it just increases my tender love for you
Mm.
and also deepens our connection.
Mhm.
That pressure to become a mom. I'm Latina, so there's no Latina grows up and is not expected to become a mom, whether you have mothering tendencies or not. It's like you're a Latina girl and that's what we do. We make babies. So from that sort of expectation, which I think I just was pushing against everything as a young woman.
Mhm.
So pushing against that idea may have been part of like my makeup and identity of never wanting to be a mom. I don't know, to just that anger. And I was thinking about a cousin, and she has three. So I can't remember if this miscarriage was between baby 1 and 2 or between baby 2 and 3, but she had a miscarriage. And the things people say, well, at least you already have
Mhm.
a baby.
Mhm.
And so she really felt like she couldn't talk to people about it because what she felt like was like shame her
Mhm.
for feeling sad about a miscarriage because here she had a baby to hold.
Mhm.
And she was so angry. She's like, I just walk down the street and I see someone with a carriage and I want to punch him.
Yeah.
She didn't,
No.
but she had that feeling.
Right. But can we normalize that? That's how it feels. Like my sister was like, these pregnant women rubbing their bellies, and she was legit angry.
Right.
It wasn't a joke. She was just mad. And
Yeah.
I knew, and I was holding in my heart. And one day, if you are pregnant again, you're going to do that and someone's going to resent you.
Yeah.
And I'm just holding that space to let you have this experience that you're having right now. And that we, venture through all of that because it feels unfair. It's a constant reminder of what you don't have, that you wanted, that you almost had, or it's painful.
Absolutely. It reminds me of you told a story after your divorce being in like a checkout line and seeing people like hold hands or kiss, and you were just like, fuck love.
I know. I was like, you jerks. I was like, I will never do that to anyone. I'll never hold a hand again or kiss in public, and leave me alone. But yeah, but it's like that because when you're in pain over something that you had and you see someone else having it, it's really painful.
Yeah.
And I appreciate what you're bringing up about feeling alone and isolated. And I am, as I'm listening to you, wanting to rewrite a story for women that, yes, you get to be excited the second you know that you're pregnant
Yes.
and share it with everyone. I don't know what we think we're saving ourselves, but you're absolutely right that what it does do is create isolation because now you're on this journey alone.
Yeah.
I get it because also people do say stupid things. So sometimes it's self-protective
Yeah.
in saying, I don't want to share this because I'm going to wait until I'm ready to hear, if I lose this child, that I'm ready to hear people say dumb things like, well, at least you have the one. Or
Yeah.
people do say not comforting things that they think are comforting that are just wildly discomforting. And as I had the miscarriage, I heard myself saying to myself all the things I had heard as my sister was trying to be like, did you give the baby a name? Do you want to give the baby a name? Do you want to plant a tree? Do you want, and I was just like, oh, this is so common. It happens like in the beginning all the time. Like it's not a big deal. And it was as if I was saying, I shouldn't grieve this.
Wow.
Like that there was a rule that I like shouldn't because miscarriages are so common. I'm just supposed to be cool with it.
Right.
But that wasn't the experience I was having. But there was a part of me wanting to protect. I didn't want my grief to be bigger than hers because her loss was so huge. But then I wasn't letting myself just feel into what is this. I would do that now. I didn't have the language or the training at that point. I just was like, no, I'm good. I'm good. Planting a tree is something you do when you have like a full term baby and you lose them, but not when you have a miscarriage. So caretaker-y of how that was impacting anyone else. And even when I was pregnant with my daughter, I think I didn't tell anyone until I hit that 12 or 13-week mark. And then I also realized, what am I protecting? Because even this isn't a guarantee. Like, so when I told people, it was like, whew, we're out of the woods. I was like, well, I'm not out of the woods ever.
Right.
A life is so precious. And this is like haunts me daily.
Yeah.
Is she safe at her friend's house? Oh, they're going to take a car ride. Is that dad a good driver? And someone did say, a friend's mom, because she was saying, God, when do you stop worrying? Like, is it when they're born or is it a few months after they're born or whatever? And her mom said, you never stop. I thought maybe when you guys turned 18, but you actually never stop.
That's great.
And that's love.
Yes.
And I think that that's what we're feeling when we're pregnant and we're wanting that pregnancy and we're excited about what's coming. I mean, we're already like just putting so much love into that experience and into that being.
So that idea of, both that safe zone, waiting until you're 12 or 13 weeks, and that idea that maybe a fetus or a birth or a life or a baby isn't, I don't know, worth mourning in those initial 12 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
That really haunted me because that very first miscarriage that I had was so early and I didn't have a lot of sadness. I was surprised, but it was so early it was like the first month or something we were trying to get pregnant that I was like, oh, okay, my body had a trial run. Let's go. Next one's for real. So I didn't even really talk to my husband about it. It happened when we were at his cousin's house and I had just realized what it was. I was sad and then I was done. And then the last one was so hard and scary. And I remember our communities coming together to be happy for us when we told them that we were pregnant. And I think it was what they wanted for Bryce. He had always wanted to be a dad. And so it was like, this has happened. And like I said, we were old. We were actually old, which is also the great thing that people say, I don't want to be an old mom. And I'm like, why are you talking to me about that? Because I am an actual old mom. you fucking kidding me? So I
Yeah.
always be like, well, I traveled the fucking world in my 20s. Had
Right.
fun chasing around a toddler. Get pregnant when you want to get pregnant.
Exactly.
And and so then when we lost the baby, and I almost longed to be together to tell them. So we, like I said, we did it at the rehearsal dinner, and then we, went on our honeymoon for 2 weeks and came back, and we had lost the baby. And I wished for that moment of my community to come together with a sad love, but with the same amount of love just being projected at us. Like I remembered them just encircling us in a hug, and I was like, oh, I would fly them all in to Colorado right now to be in their embrace.
Yeah.
So I'm with you. I love that idea of women being able to celebrate the moment they find out they're pregnant. Because if that's something that you have been wanting, that is a moment to rejoice. And
Mhm.
we can just make that okay.
Mhm.
And like you said, you're never in a safe zone. You're never
No.
in a safe zone. You and I worry consistently about
Everything.
horrible, graphic ways that our children might die. And so we
Yeah.
very much, I think, are both acutely aware of there's never a moment where our kiddos are in a protective bubble
Yeah.
and we couldn't possibly lose them. So why wouldn't that start at day one? Why wouldn't that
Right.
start at the moment that you find out that you're pregnant?
Right. And I think too, a piece I want to add to this that I worry as I'm telling my story, it could get lost in translation. So I want to add this piece that is my grief could have been even bigger than my sister's. Like there really isn't a hierarchy of grief. So I want to
Yes.
honor whatever level of grief you feel and whatever feels most honoring to you around grieving a pregnancy loss, around what you want to do with that. If you're like, I really do want to plant a tree,
Yeah.
I think that that's another piece that you'll hear me say a lot is like not projecting what grief should be for anyone else and what level it should be at for anyone else around what they're going through. And whether that's that they're grieving enough or they're not grieving enough, or
Mm.
let it be what it is. And I think that so much of the grief work that I think needs to be done in the world is around educating us to hold spaces as people are grieving, not educating us on how to grieve. Your being will know what feels like the right amount.
Yeah.
And it's about the people around us not saying, but it was just like 3 weeks. I mean,
Yeah.
or you have a baby or whatever this consolation prize is. Like
Yeah.
that's not a thing. And this is a loss that I'm experiencing. And just let me feel that loss.
Yeah, absolutely. It reminded me of another friend who had a miscarriage probably about the same timing as mine, 12, 13 weeks. She ended up having it medically induced. And I don't even know how to, we don't even have real language for this. She refers to it as past the baby in a hospital or past the fetus in the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And there was this sort of like very fiery time around legislation that was happening in the state where she lives. And her comment about it all was, look, I've had a miscarriage. It was just like a giant blood clot. Like I have no feelings about it. And I had no judgment toward her. Like I was like,
Mm-hmm.
that is totally how you experienced it. But I thought about me. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
I had so many feelings about that giant blood clot.
Mm-hmm.
And I reached out to her, sort of personally. I was just like, I absolutely understand what you're saying and why you're saying it in this moment. And I didn't have the words then. I don't remember exactly what I said, but if it were today, it was something like have some space for people whose loss was a lot more sort of emotionally impactful
Mm-hmm.
than yours was. Because it did feel, I think the way it was presented did feel like, what's the big deal?
Mm-hmm.
We shouldn't be making this a big deal. And I was like, but it can be a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's a big deal to you, / I'm talking about myself,
Mm-hmm.
then it is a big deal. So yeah, I love that what feels right in your body for grieving and honoring whatever that represented to you, whether it
Yeah.
represented a future or a life or love or a last chance, maybe, as
Yeah.
like for older moms, whatever it represented, to honor that and grieve it and give it the time that
Right.
it needs.
The piece that's coming up for me now is also around, well, my sister she did have a miscarriage after her stillbirth.
Mm.
I mean, that was a tremendous loss and brought up the intensity of the first loss because she felt hopeful again and then
Absolutely.
lost this child and was told by the doctors it's really common that you will have a miscarriage before you get pregnant. It's sort of like the body trying to figure something out or whatever. But it was just whatever that
Mhm.
constellation attempt was, it was really this intense experience for her. And I mean, now she has two living children, and whenever they have a tree that they planted in his name on her property, and I feel like maybe put some of his ashes in the soil, and they'll take a picture with
Mhm.
that tree every year. And the
Oh.
miscarriage isn't represented, but at the time that it happened, it felt like, oh, this is another child. But one of the things she's run into that I also want to talk about is people always ask, it's such a like nothing question to people. And it really felt complicated for her to answer. And it's, is this your only child?
Mm.
And so
Yeah.
she was in a group in Atlanta called Share Atlanta, if they still exist. It was an amazing support group, and I encourage, if you're in that area, to be part of it. And I had gone to some of those meetings, but the woman who led it, I don't remember if she had any living children, but she did count her children. I mean, I think there were a couple of maybe stillbirths or really early losses, but she counted the miscarriages as well. And that this is how many pregnancies I've had. This is how many like
Mm.
potential of children I've had. And that why we ask that question is interesting. I don't totally know if it's just small talk, but it's an interesting
Mhm.
thing. And I really think about it when I have that curiosity,
Right.
but that I know that it's a really hard question to answer from my sister's lived experience of,
Yeah.
what do I say? Do I say, no, it's one of three? Or like, is this your first child?
Right.
They'll say that when she had her as a baby. It was like, oh, is this your first baby? And she's like, how do I answer that? Do I say my
Yeah.
first living one? And now we're in a really different conversation than small talk. But yeah, that there's something to honoring for yourself what feels real for you in that as well. Like, what feels true for me? Is it, oh, I have the one child
Absolutely.
and this is her? Or is it, yeah, I've had 3 pregnancies or 4 pregnancies in my lifetime. This is my one child, the one living child that I have.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember, I mean, obviously, my situation is nothing like that, but I remember the first medical form filling out. It must have been as we started on our infertility journey because I asked you so many fucking questions about getting pregnant. And that was the question: how many pregnancies have you had? And I felt so like I get to count
Hmm.
these. And not that I don't feel, I don't know, I no longer mourn even the bigger loss as a sort of empty hole.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't feel like I had a child or something before that. But there was something about honoring that my body did this, my body
Mm-hmm.
has done this. So it did when you were talking, it did make me feel like, oh, I remember the first time after my miscarriage, that big miscarriage, seeing that question and feeling really seen. It
Mm-hmm.
wasn't about having birthed children, it was about having been pregnant in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing that it reminded me of was both of my grandmothers lost a child very differently. So my mom's mom, she lost, I believe it was a little girl,
Mm-hmm.
stillborn. And then my mom's mom, my Uncle Manuel, died when I was like right before I was born, the summer or some point in like the 80s. So he was an adult and kind of living somewhere else. But I remember the first time hearing my grandma who lost the baby say and talk about it like her baby,
Mm-hmm.
and then I remember my aunties at one point saying like our little sister, and I'm pretty sure they did name her. It's probably a very Catholic thing
Mm-hmm.
too. I don't remember it now. I'm kind of like, oh, I should bring that back into the world. And then obviously my uncle, who was very much a part of family lore, this person who passed before I ever got to meet him, who was the eldest, who was that sort of golden child a little bit, I think.
Mm-hmm.
It was my grandma's first, and it was a little boy. And I don't know if you know anything about Latinas and their boys, but we kind of probably created Mama's boy. So there was this very intense, like, narrative and mythology about him, pictures of him in her house, pictures of him in our house, that he was always around. But I do wonder, yeah, how they spoke about that and what they heard back, given my grandma had 8 living
Mm-hmm.
children and my other grandmother had 6 or 5. Sorry, he was the 6th. See, we still talk about it as
Mm-hmm.
6. So it's, yeah, that's such an interesting and delicate thing to navigate.
Yeah.
I can only imagine.
Yeah.
The only other relatable, and I bet this happens to you, would be my guess, is people asking me if I was going to have more.
Yeah.
Does that happen to you, especially having just the one?
No. I'm curious about
Oh,
that. That's interesting. I don't think
yeah.
or has it just not registered if they've said it? So I was of advanced maternal age when I had my daughter, as they say in the medical
You
community.
were also a
Yes,
geriatric pregnancy?
exactly. You're like, wait, what? I'm not geriatric yet, but my pregnancy is like, what? It's so bizarre.
Right. It's such a fucking male
Yeah,
thing to
it's
put
so
on
dumb,
them.
right? And so I don't know if they just think I'm too geriatric and they figure I'm done. But yeah, but I mean, they do ask when, we meet up or something like, oh, do you have any other kids? Everyone asks that. And I don't have a specific trigger around it for myself. I mean, I'm just like, no, just the one. But I think about my sister every time I get asked that. And I'm like,
Mm.
we got to work on
Mhm.
that, people.
Yeah.
Or you got to be ready to hold the answer. And you have to be aware that if you ask that someone, that you're actually asking,
Right.
I'm here for it if you want to tell me about the one that you lost or.
Yeah. I love that.
Mhm.
Yeah, I get that question a lot. And as you were talking, I was like, I wonder if, I mean, I still get it. I got it this summer.
Mm.
Um, and I don't know,
You're
I'm in my
you're
40s.
geriatric.
I'm for sure geriatric now. But I really, really, really wanted more
Yeah.
children. I mean, it was like, let's see, they were born in November. January, I was already talking, all right, what's my timeline?
Yeah.
And I was nursing the boys. So there's sort of a timeline if you nurse. And I wasn't ready to
Mhm.
stop nursing at 6 months. So there was, so it kind of moved the timeline. And then when I finally went back, I went back to our midwife. And she said, there's like this delicate line, right, that they need to walk, where I think they know and understand medical complications
Mhm.
and don't want to freak you out, but also don't want to tell you, like, hell yeah, go
Yeah.
get those frozen embryos put in.
Yeah.
And so I can't remember what she said the first time, but it wasn't like highly encouraging.
Mhm.
But I went back to the fertility clinic and I was like, okay, Bryce, well, what if we have a little girl? We had two boys. And I was like, what if we have a little girl? Can we just get pregnant if it's a little girl? And then I went back to the midwife and I could tell she was just hemming and hawing and not really answering. And I said, okay, just if I were your daughter, what would you tell me? And she was so honest. She just said, I would tell you that you would have a high probability of dying during childbirth, and is bringing one more life into the world worth leaving 2 or 3 children without a loving mom? You have 2 babies, and I think you should just hold them. And I was like, wow.
Of
And
course.
it was so heartbreaking. And we had to make all of these decisions. You have these embryos that are frozen, you have to make decisions about them.
Mhm.
And it took me beyond that, I think, one more year to decide to let the embryos go.
Mhm.
And I mean, I probably only a year ago was finally like, okay, I'm not going to birth any more children.
Mm.
I so wanted more children. And I felt like our circumstances, we have so much love and we have enough resources that, like, it wouldn't be, well, we'll have to have a different quality of life if we bring one more
Mhm.
being into this. So I was just like, I don't know why we wouldn't. So it's such a tender thing. I do tell people, I have made the choice when they ask me to say, no, I really wanted more. And I had such a hard birth that I would be risking my own life if I had any. So I've had to,
Yeah.
I didn't have a choice. I don't get to have more. And they get a little uncomfortable sometimes. And I don't fucking care. I'm
Good.
like, I'm not going to pretend like I don't want them. I'm not going to pretend like that this was a choice I made.
Mhm.
I mean, it was. I could have steel magnolia'd this,
Yeah.
but I chose not to. But also, I was given pretty shitty
Yeah.
choice.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, you have a choice. You could 90% die,
Ugh.
or 10% have a healthy child and a healthy mom. And I was like, well, that's not really. I mean, it's a choice, but it's a shitty
It's a
choice.
shitty choice. Yeah. Yeah, and there's so much unknown. It's hard to even make those choices, make decisions in that. So I respect holding on to the embryos for longer, holding on to the desire for longer, and I think that that's part of a grief process too.
Yeah.
I've had a few friends in the fertility and fertility conversations, and it's like, okay, if it's not happening, then I'm done. It's such a heart-wrenching experience and I'm done. And then it doesn't happen. And then they, wait a few months and I'm like, I don't know if I'm done. I hang on. And then they, it's like, so it's
Yeah.
so individual how much you're going to put yourself continually in risk's way, continually in the risk of just feeling the pain of not getting something you're really wishing for and hoping for. And I think as we're talking, I really see multiple levels of how we hold each other just feels important to highlight as we're coming to the end of this episode. But thinking about honoring ourselves. So first, just whatever experience we're having, saying, I'm pregnant, I'm so excited, and I'm having a loss, but how much do I want to involve everyone in any part of my journey? Who are the people that can hold it? I think there's always wisdom in knowing who's going to be there for you, because you don't need to add a level of suffering with people who, if you kind of know ahead of time, they're not going to be good with this. You also have the right to not involve them, right?
Absolutely.
And there's that. But then also, as fellow humans, how are we supporting and how do we show up for each other in that? As women, especially, I think that we know these experiences, and whoever started to define what was acceptable and not acceptable, let's shake that up.
Yeah.
Like, it's absolutely, we can hold each other in these tender moments of loss and not say, but you have another baby, or it was so early, it was like just a little clump of tissue. And it also, like you said, if that's what's true for you, that's what's true for you, but not trying to make something true for someone else.
Yes.
And just holding them where they are. I'll share this because it feels relevant, but I had this sweet session with this young person that I work with who had a ton of anxiety, and we were spinning in their anxiety in our session together. And we talked about what they needed from their parents. They just said, just let me cry and just hold me. And I said, should I send them a text, right now and tell them that? Say, you're going to come home and you're going to talk about what's happening. And all you want is for them to let you cry and hold you, not to fix it, not to offer solution. And, they're like, yes. And so I just sent the text, but it was this moment of like, isn't that what we all want? And people think they're being helpful because they're saying, perhaps you aren't relating to this correctly. And it's just like, let me relate to this, how I'm relating to it right here, right now.
God, this is like life journey lesson for me. I think because of grief, I don't do it around grief. I'm sure positive, as close to 100% as you can get, that I did it before the loss of my dad, and miscarriages. So I am so aware of it, but I've been becoming aware of it in all these other situations because I am so action oriented. There is something that I want to do. I fucking go do it. And I do it like full speed. Like, oh, I want to learn how to drive a race car. And then you're going to see me fucking, driving down Bandamere. I mean, I can't, I know exactly what's wrong with me, but it's funny that it gets exemplified like that. So when I hear other people's struggles, I have a tendency to jump into action. And yesterday, I think it was yesterday, I had a good friend was telling me about like just this really moment she regretted at work. And she felt like it was just like horrific and whatever. And I just fucking listened. I was so proud of myself. So there were a million things I wanted to say, from like, I'm sure you feel like it's a bigger deal than it was to them, or I'm sure there's a lesson to learn here. I fucking didn't say any of it.
Yay.
I was so proud of myself. It was so against my own character. I felt really good. Like I grew.
Yeah.
I grew yesterday.
Growth is possible. And so agree. I am a fixer helper by nature, probably part of why people thought you'd be a great mom because you have all this fucking advice and you just give it unsolicited. And it was such a learning for me. And especially, I mean, that is the training, my training and being a therapist is trusting that people have their own wisdom, trusting it's a learning. And so what I also learned to do was watch myself be advicey and watch myself, want to fix. And so and experience, I think you're right, from experience of loss and grief, and you feel people do the thing that you've been doing and you go, oof, I am not doing that anymore. That did not feel good, And so when I see that come up in me whenever someone is in a lot of pain and I want to make it go away, if I can just say that, God, I notice how badly I want to make this pain go away. And I know that I can't. Now I'm back with what's actually happening instead of trying to make something different happen.
Mm.
And it just helps me to name that urge. So then that part of me gets quiet when I say it out loud. When I say, gosh, I notice how badly I want to make this different or make it better. Then that part of me is like, cool, thanks for giving me a voice. I'll be
I just
quiet
needed
now.
a little airtime.
So I just have to name it and then I can be there. But I remember that being when my sister lost her baby, that a friend's mom who I didn't know, but the friend had like shared the story with her mom. She said, my mom said she wishes she could absorb this pain for your sister. And she's, she's just so sorry that she's having to experience this. I was like, wow, your mom knows something. That was the exact right thing to say, that we were all feeling it. I wish I could absorb this pain. I wish I could suffer this pain for you. And I was like, she doesn't even know my sister. That is such a kindness. Like, it's so sweet.
Yeah.
She somehow knows the pain she's in and knows that there's nothing she can do, that we're just powerless, It's really sweet.
Absolutely.
Yes. Well, thank you for this conversation.
Always. And as we do, how have you touched into your grief this week before we close out?
For me this week, I have been feeling aware. It wasn't entirely intentional, so it's not like when I go searching for ways to touch into my grief, but I've been feeling aware of old patterns that are ready to be released in the ways that I operate in the world, and a lot of it is around an intense inner critic, and really starting to sit with it instead of trying to talk my way out of it, and feeling a lot of sadness for the ways that it's impacted my life to be so hard on myself. And yeah, so there's a lot of tenderness around that, and feeling some grief for not knowing there was even a different way when I was younger, up until probably really, last week. I mean, that there have been pieces of it that I've been exploring for so long, but that I have just really been listening to that voice that's so harsh, and realizing it's just not the truth, and I don't need it anymore. And I just feel the grief in that process of shifting.
Oh, I love that. Thank you. I love all those pieces of you.
Thank you. How about you? How are you touching into your grief?
So I heard this song that's a couple years old by a guy named Dean Lewis, and it's called How Do I Say Goodbye? And it's a song that he wrote. He's an Australian singer, and it's a song that he wrote when his dad passed away. And being me, none of this will surprise you, but I'll sometimes hear a song and then I'm like, oh my God, I need to learn it. And I will listen to it obsessively, and I'll be like, now I need to learn it on the piano. Now I need to learn it on my guitar. Now I need to learn how to sing it. And so for the past few days, it's just been on repeat so I can learn it. And I've been tinkering with my guitar to find like a little arrangement that feels good, and just really thinking about him. And so it's been very present. And this song just kind of appeared. Like I said, I'd never even heard of this singer and hadn't heard this song. And then it just appeared a couple of days ago. And I was like, wow, I needed that medicine, that music medicine in my life. So that's been my medicine.
Beautiful.
Well, take care of that tender heart, and we will talk to you all soon. I love you.
Love you. Thank you for listening to this episode of All the Grief. You can find us on Instagram at All the Grief Pod. And please take a moment to rate our podcast and share us with your friends. We'd love to keep expanding our reach to all the people who could benefit from conversations on grief.